5 if you want. So this is one we just talked about, where you're just, again, slightly fewer patrol officers than your peers. The slide before showed that you have a pretty good you're kind of in the higher end of the number of calls per service. So if you go to the next slide. So these were just slightly off. And then we looked at crime, and this is our concern was in property crimes that you're flat where the rest of the country is going down. And we went to the next slide with violent crimes. Again, it's flat here. You're growing a little bit. Like this goes up through 2006, while the rest of the country went down. So we said, well, this does indicate that there's more than just being slightly off with the number of officers on the street. So that's why how we came up with our manpower allocation model, which is this page here. This is not the end-all, be-all. This is not what we suggest you go out and hire 75 patrol officers. But this gives you a model to use, developed around the assumptions that you have for the kind of community you want. The assumptions in here is that patrol officer is they're your first line. They're the folks with the most that meet with the citizens the most. If you're going to be what you call a community-oriented policing department, problem-solving policing, you're going to spend at least the equivalent amount of time in responding to patrol to calls for service as you do in what we call proactive policing. And then the other time is spent in administrative duties. We call this a 40-40-20 model. 40% proactive, 40% responding to calls, and 20% in administrative duties. Right now, you're spending 53% of your time responding to calls for service. It leaves about 27% of their time to do proactive policing. So, well, maybe that's why the crime trends are going contrary to what's going on in the rest of the country. That's not a conclusion, it's just really an hypothesis. But it didn't surprise us that much. The number of officers that this model shows is 75. So let's go on from there. This is the shift structure in and of itself. The gray area in the background is the calls for service throughout the day. And the dark white thin line is your manpower. And you can see there's a little bit, if we change the starting and ending time of schedules, we can do a better job of responding to calls for service. Again, this one doesn't cost anything. This is just a little shift that we can, and we'll be able to provide citizens better response, reduce response times, answering more calls for service timely. Go to the next one. This is, so let's stop right there, if we can. I think this is where the questions are. Go back to the slide, 2 slides ago, or one more, which is that chart there. I think that's probably, that was the biggest area we spent our time. This is the analysis of all your calls for services and all your HR data that shows how officers spend their time. We try to come up with every minute of every day of every officer, again, in terms of 373 that are doing this. And this is how they're spending their time. So this is the key slide in our presentation, we think. This is, again, the number of officers you need on the street to become a true community policing department. You're adding ComStat as this will help pinpoint where your community policing time should be spent. Again, we think that'll lead to the ultimate outcome. The ultimate goal of what you want is reduce crime. To go back to those earlier crimes, you're not in step with the national trend, and something should be done. I think it started to be done the last year. Again, those trend lines stopped in 2006. But if we want a safer Tulsa, we're going to have to do something, and part of it is putting some officers on the street. So any questions, we can stop right here for a minute if you all have any
questions. Okay, keep rolling.
Okay, so let's move forward.